Okay, let's dive right in. We're going to unpack a really detailed point-by-point critique of the spiritual teacher Sadhguru, and this is all based on an analysis from the Advanced Apologetics Research Channel.
So the source for this critique kicks things off with this specific biblical verse, and they use it to frame their entire argument, essentially labeling Sadhguru's teachings as a modern example of this false knowledge, a system they argue is just filled with contradictions and built on pure speculation.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this down. We'll walk through the critique step by step. We'll start with their main argument, and then we'll dig into the specific types of errors the source claims to have found, from factual mistakes all the way to logical problems.
So what's the central argument here? Well, the source claims that Sadhguru's whole philosophy, his path of knowledge or jnana yoga, is built on a foundation of unproven ideas taken from ancient Hindu texts, ideas that are presented as solid fact, but which the source says have absolutely zero proof.
And get this, according to the critique, these aren't just presented as things to believe in. They're laid out as the fundamental laws of the universe. They actually define the problem, this supposed cycle of karmic suffering, that Sadhguru's inner engineering then promises to solve for you.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. The main tool the source uses to deconstruct these teachings is by exposing what it calls a technique of pseudoscience. The technique is called equivocation.
So, what is equivocation exactly? Well, the analysis defines it as taking a word that has a very precise scientific meaning and then applying it loosely to a spiritual idea. The goal, they say, is to borrow the authority of science to make mystical concepts sound more legitimate than they actually are.
And this is a perfect example of what they mean. The source claims that you'll see these incredibly complex ideas from quantum mechanics being used as proof for spiritual concepts like a universal consciousness. The problem is, the actual science has absolutely nothing to do with those mystical claims.
All right, first up, let's tackle what the source calls straight-up factual errors. These are claims that are presented as objective reality, but which the analysis says have no basis in empirical science whatsoever. So the critique just lays them out, one by one. It runs through this whole list of core spiritual concepts and says, look, not a single one of these has any verifiable basis in neuroscience, biology, or physics, even though they're often wrapped up in very scientific-sounding language.
And the point the critique really hammers home is this. You have this entire spiritual anatomy being taught that directly contradicts everything we know from, well, actual human biology. It's a complete mismatch.
Okay, so we've looked at the factual claims. Now, the analysis shifts gears and starts looking at the arguments themselves, pointing out what it calls several recurring logical fallacies.
So what you're seeing here is a breakdown of the logic, or, according to the source, the lack of it. The big takeaway here is that monumental claims about how the universe works are being built on things like subjective inner feelings. And the source's point is simple. That just doesn't add up logically.
All right, so after tackling flawed logic, the critique goes even deeper to what it calls the flawed foundations. The argument here is that the entire philosophical system is built on a handful of core assumptions that are just treated as undeniable facts right from the get-go without any proof.
According to this analysis, these ideas are the shaky ground the entire philosophy is built on. And the conclusion they draw is pretty blunt. If these core beliefs are just assumptions with no proof, then the whole thing, well, it just collapses.
And this all builds to a final major point. The critique frames this whole thing not as a small disagreement, but as a head-on collision between two totally different and, frankly, irreconcilable ways of knowing what's true.
So the source presents this as the ultimate fork in the road. On one side, you've got what it calls the path of self-salvation. It's all about human effort, looking inside yourself to discover truth. On the other side, you have the path of divine grace, which is all about accepting truth that is revealed by God. The analysis doesn't just say they're different, it's saying you have to choose, because they can't both be right.
So the final verdict from the source is clear. This isn't just a debate over whether chakras are real. It's a fundamental clash over the very source of truth itself. One side, it says, is based on God's revelation, and the other, it's just human speculation dressed up to look like real knowledge.
And that leaves us with this final thought from the critique. When you hear spiritual ideas being wrapped up in the language of science, the analysis insists that we have to ask one crucial question. What is this really based on? Is there verifiable evidence, or is it just, as that opening verse said, knowledge falsely so called?